Her next release couldn't have been more different, and it was the first of a sequence of concept albums celebrating the great standards of popular music. The first of the collections, often referred to as the Torch Song Trilogy, was 1981's Torch.
I didn't know that it was the right thing to do. I didn't know that standards were the right thing to record. I just knew that I had a very special relationship with those songs because I'd grown up listening to them, and my mother and father played them, and I too was in love with Frank Sinatra. I too was in love with Ella Fitzgerald and Peggy Lee and Annie Ross and Ellington and Basie and a lot of jazz singers that I heard, and I simply loved to sing those songs. And it wasn't but a year later that Linda Ronstadt came out with hers and was a huge success, and whereas my record label did not push mine. My record label was Warner Brothers, and Mo Austin at that time didn't think that releasing an album of standards was at all a commercial idea, and he admits that to me now, that was one of the biggest mistakes that he ever made. Now, there is some sort of a saying now about if you make a standard record, that ruins your career as a pop artist. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that a lot of people want to do it. I think I was one of the first. And I only will choose a song to do as an interpretive singer if I can understand it and if I can identify with it.
You're listening to Clouds in My Coffee, the Carly Simon story, here on BBC Radio 2. 1990's My Romance and the album Film Noir, released 7 years later, completed Carly Simon's interpretation of the standards. But such concept albums resulted in less frequent appearances on the record charts. The artist and the radio industry that had championed her career had changed.
The personalities, the radio personalities, had so much more of their own choices. You used to turn into certain disc jockeys because of the kind of music that they would play, because you liked their taste. Now you don't have that opportunity anymore because everything is formatted to the station, because stations only play what records are selling in stores. So you only have one choice. You don't have many choices. You can't get turned on to a lot of new music through radio anymore, which makes radio a very stagnant place. It's not the exciting place that it used to be, where you couldn't wait to turn on the radio because you didn't know what music you might hear. And that's how it started out when I was first making records, is that certain disc jockeys liked my music, and that's why they were playing it. It was the disc jockeys that made hits.
Despite her own success and the inherited legacy of her family, for Carly Simon, it's the simple things in life that are the most important. Her children, her home, and surprisingly, bad weather.
I always think that starting or the beginning of a project in adverse conditions, especially weather, is a good omen. I like heavy weather. I like big snows. I like big rains, big winds. I don't particularly love the mild weather. I like having elements that seem bigger than my own problems. On a mild day, my own problems can more easily come to the fore. You know, I've been thinking lately of writing an autobiography. I've been asked to write one for a long, long time, and of course the answer's always been no, because the thought of exposing, not myself, but the thought of exposing other people's lives, you don't have any right to do that. And so therefore, in the way that they intersect with mine, I would be happy to write about fictitiously if they didn't have names and have people guess who they're really about, just like with You're So Vain. But I do need to commit it to paper for my own sake. I do need to commit it to paper for my children's sake. And so, yes, I don't see the need for spilling your guts out to everybody, because that's a bore. But we should be all too happy to be sharing our own revelations that we ourselves come up with that could help anybody else.
From the mid-1980s, Carly enjoyed a special relationship with one of America's first ladies, Jackie Onassis. It was a friendship that would result in the revelation of another side to Carly Simon.
Jackie called me up around 1985, and she was the first person to ask me to write my autobiography. And she said, I think a lot of people would be interested in what you had to say. And so I tried. I wrote 80 pages of it. and we got to be very good friends around that time. And instead, I finally said, I can't do it because of all of the obvious reasons. And she understood, and I said, could I offer in its place the story that I've written called Amy the Dancing Bear? I used to tell my children when they were small, I'd start out by reading them great literature, and then as they didn't go to sleep, I had to turn off the lights and make up stories of my own. So I created a number of different characters, and Amy was one of them, and Amy was a little bear who didn't like to go to bed, and she always offered resistance to her mama, who was very, very, very patient, but eventually just had to go to bed anyway. And so then the daughter puts the mother to bed, which is, of course, very mythic.
And Carly Simon's next creative project is also about another little bear and his friends.
I'm doing the music for The Adventures of Piglet. Since Disney bought the right to Pooh, they have exhausted the material which is legitimately in the books Winnie the Pooh, and they have the allowance to create new stories based upon the characters. And this movie is basically about Piglet, and they asked me to write the music for it. And since they've asked me to do that, they've liked the way my voice has come out being the characters of all of the characters, so that I'm not only Kanga and Pooh, I'm also Piglet and Eeyore and Tigger, and I'm everybody, sort of the Greek chorus.
Away from the 100-acre wood, Carly Simon seeks inspiration from everything around her. And in 1994, it was a box in her bedroom that resulted in the classic Simon album, Letters Never Sent.
I keep a whole lot of letters that I shouldn't send to people in a box on top of my closet. And, I write them in a fit of froth, a fit of frothy horror. And then I think, oh my God, I'd better... Well, my mother always said you better sleep on it before you actually put a stamp on it. So I usually sleep on them and then decide not to send them the next day. And so the pile in the boxes become larger and larger and can eventually hardly fit into my closet. So I have endless boxes, and I took some of them down and read some of them, and some of them came naturally into being songs. And that's how that album came into being. And there's a song that I wrote right after my mother died called Like a River. There are songs of mine which happened very immediately, and that was one of them that happened within 3 or 4 days after her death. I was so filled up with so much that I had to say, and it just poured out of me.
And Letters Never Sent also featured a tribute to her friend Jackie Onassis.
Well, then there was this other song called Touched by the Sun, which I'd written for Jackie during her illness. What she had to go through so touched me, and we were both interested in literature, obviously, and we both have a very, very naughty, girlish sense of humor. And yet she was very strong, and I'm strong, but as Ben, my son, says, my nervous system I wear on the outside of my body. Jackie was much more durable, that she was emotionally more durable.
Carly Simon has also had to face her own battle with cancer. In 1998, she had a malignant tumor removed from her breast and underwent chemotherapy. It was the unlikely figure of the American composer George Gershwin who put her on the road to a creative recovery.
I was very much recovering from my bout with breast cancer and chemotherapy, and I was pretty much by myself, and I was trying to resurrect myself, and I was trying to remember that I had music, and music was what I relied upon, and music was what brought me to health again, and music was what made me feel whole. And Gershwin has always been a hero of mine, as he is of so many people. And when I read the Jean-Paul Sartre book called Nausea, the character in that book, he has this malaise, and he's helped out finally by listening to the jukebox in a Paris cafe, and he hears a song by an American composer that I always thought was Gershwin, and he imagined the American composer to be sweating it out in the summer heat and to be finding his courage through the notes, and that made me feel as if I could do the same. And that when my demons come to me, as they so often do, I can just, if I can make it to the piano, I can make it through. How can I go on when every thought hurts? I flirt with the notion of no more songs. My old familiar foe, self-pity, haunts me.
In Honor of You, George was featured on her last studio album, The Bedroom Tapes, recorded in her daughter's old bedroom in Carly's home on Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, and I'm so glad that you're talking about this album, because I really had this feeling that this album was just dead in the water and that it would never be talked about. Or, I mean, even though it had the best reviews of my entire career, I mean, people really saw it as being something special. The Bedroom Tapes had a theme, because I was leaving New York City at that time. I was trying to bring together a lot of my memories and a lot of my New York experiences, and tie them up in a neat ribbon and leave them behind and then go to another place. When I made it, I wasn't with a record label because I'd expired at Arista. I'd done my 8 or 9 albums for them. I was no longer with a record company. I was shopping around to see with whom I'd sign next. And Clive Davis at Arista was the most enthusiastic about having me again. I had only done albums that were in the black, and Clive very much wanted to sign with me. I sent him a copy of my lyrics as soon as I had them done, and he said, "These are the best lyrics you've ever written." And he called me into his office and he said, "I'm anxious to do for you what I did for Carlos Santana, and I want to I want to bring you into the next generation." And I said, "Yay, let's do it."
But in one of the most famous boardroom shuffles in the record business, Clive Davis unceremoniously left Arista, only to be replaced by a new team of record executives who seemingly had no interest in Carly Simon's new album.
I got really lost in the mix because L.A. Reid came into Arista, and he was determined to have Arista be a hip-hop label and a Latin label, and he was very not interested in me. And so I heard that he had said about me, "Let's just get rid of her record as soon as possible. It'll be dead by the time we have the international conference at Toronto." I forced upon him a meeting in which I came into his office, and he spent the whole time watching MTV and not even looking at me. He was that disinterested in my material. He couldn't get rid of me fast enough. And when I say couldn't get rid of me, he just was paying no attention to me and cutting the budget completely so that I didn't stand a chance. So I made a deal with them that they didn't have to pay me for the second album if I could have my first album back. And so they made that deal with me, and they gave me the Bedroom Tapes back. And it's the first time I've ever owned an album that I had put out. So I own the Bedroom Tapes, and I can do whatever I want with it. And I'm going to put it out again, and it's going to be a double album. It's going to be called The Bedroom Tapes on one side and When Manhattan Was a Maiden on the other side, which is what the original title of that album was called. And it's going to have a lot of outtakes that the Bedroom Tapes did not have because we didn't have the budget to be able to do it once Clive Davis was fired, and they pulled the rug out from under me.
She's new in New York, dressed up like a dog of war.
One of the tracks that'll be featured on the re-released Bedroom Tapes, which is due early next year. And Carly Simon has another new project in the works, a Christmas collaboration with record producer Don Was.
My Christmas album I did just about a month ago. And I went out to Los Angeles with my son Ben because he was doing his first concert out there, and he asked me to sing backups on it with him. And so I said I would love to, and I got on a plane against my better judgment. And afterward, I didn't want to go back to New York by myself. And I called up Don on that Monday, and I said, "Don, I want to stay here. I've always wanted to do a Christmas album. Please do it with me here. I don't want to go back to New York." And he said, "Yes." And so we did it in my hotel room. We had Jim Keltner set up his drums in the corner of this tiny hotel room. It wasn't even a suite. We did all the standards, the great carols, and we did a song that Livingston Taylor wrote that's beautiful called "Christmas Is Almost Here." and we did a reggae version of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. I did I'll Be Home for Christmas. I wrote a new verse for that.